Chapter 28. Salt, Smoke, and Streets. They never got their long-promised rest. Instead of being allowed to sleep in until the evening, like their new schedule was supposed to allow, the IS&D were rudely woken up by someone banging on the bunk room door. Cracking open an eye, Prey briefly entertained the notion of triggering the explosive runes he'd placed on the door. "That's not fair," the figure of gloom mumbled from his bunk. The curtains were drawn across the lone window, but enough light still filtered in to add definition to the shadowy shape of the sergeant fumbling for the alarm clock. "That was only 6 hours, Gloom protested to nobody in particular. Prey didn't blame him. Even he was having trouble waking up as the loud knocking came again. 6 hours would usually be plenty, but they'd been getting 6 hours and under for the last week. All that sleep deprivation caught up with you. Prey sat up and tried to rub sleep from his eyes, the hated gold bands bumping uncomfortably across his face. He gave the door and whomever was on the other side of it a dark glower. "There's going to be no day of promised rest, is there? The Night Guard have managed to mess up something else, and now they want us to fix it," he thought in resignation. Even Crimson was reluctant to get up, putting a wing over his head in what was probably a vain hope that the person outside would just get bored and go away. The knocking came a third time, even louder. Gloom raised his voice and struggled from under his blanket. All right, I'm coming. Keep your wings on." The insistent banging was just starting up for the fourth time when Gloom pulled open the door. He didn't quite shout, "What?" But his disheveled mane, squinted slit eyes, rumpled fur, and unarmored appearance probably said it all. Too bad it was a night guard at the door, so Gloom couldn't tell them to get lost. "Yes, Private?" Gloom asked thickly. Thestral saluted. "Lieutenant Starry says sorry, but Captain Nighthawk wants to speak with the IS&D. Gloom blinked, having to take a full second to catch up. "Oh. All right, we'll be in his office in 5 minutes, he yawned. "Actually, you're to report to Lieutenant Starry Wing. He and the Night Guard are all assembling in the guard hall." Something a bit bigger than just messing up is happening, Prey thought, waking up quickly. If Nighthawk was summoning all the Night Guard, despite them not supposed to be on duty, whatever was happening was likely to be a surprise training day. Prey was already pulling his ribbon out from under the pillow in preparation to go. "All right, we'll be in the guard hall in 5 minutes then," Gloom told the guard at the door. The Night Guard saluted to Gloom again and hurried away up the corridor. Crimson had also gotten the hint, and had glided down from his bunk and started to swiftly unpack his armor, trying to juggle that while attempting to bind his mane back into a tight warrior's braid with the makeshift metal mane ring. Prey heard Gloom sigh loudly as he went over to his locker, his thoughts coming back into perception range. "If it's not one thing, it's another. Hope it's not more riots or something." "Do you know what this could be, sir?" Crimson asked, pulling his chest plate over his head. "No idea. Prey, you up yet?" Gloom mumbled. "Yes, sir." "Unfortunately," he thought, with a wistful look back at the bunk. It also seemed unlikely that they were going to get anything to eat this morning. Nothing really had changed. "Horse apples. If Prey gets sick again because of this, I'm gonna... something or another." Gloom took 10 precious seconds out to massage his head. "I'm not awake enough to deal with this yet." They hadn't even reached the guard hall, and it was already obvious something serious was going on. The Night Guard weren't the only ones en route, either. Royal Guards were hurrying in the same direction as them. Prey combed their thoughts as they passed each other, listening for the cause of concern. But none of them knew anything outside of the reason that the sky's filling up with smoke outside. A fire in the city? No, they have unicorn magic and Pegasi weather control to smother any fire. Unless it was a firestorm. However, there was nowhere near enough blind panic for it to be a firestorm. Plus, if there was a blaze of that size, they wouldn't be wasting time assembling the guard. "No, it can't be a fire," Prey thought to himself, pulse calming down a bit. But that left the question, what was it then? In the guard hall, the guards of both night and day were swiftly gathering. Sergeants and corporals were organizing them into their respective formations with much hubbubaloo. As always, the Royal Guard dominated the hall, taking up most of the available space, with the night guard having been sort of shoved to the side to form up over there in their corner. Prey hurried to keep up as Gloom made a beeline for Lieutenant Starry Wing, standing at the head of the night guard ranks. "Sir," Gloom said, snapping a salute. Time was pressing, so he didn't give the full address. Starry Wing was a bit busy, but he quickly turned around. "Sergeant Gloom, good, you came quickly." "Yes, sir. What can we do?" Gloom asked. No complaint about all three of them being dog-tired. If they'd been summoned, it was because they were needed for something. "The guard captains will be here any minute. They've had an emergency meeting with Princess Celestia. They'll know what's going on. Captain Nighthawk will want to speak with you specifically, I think," Starwing told them. Obviously, he was as much in the dark, or blinding light in the Thestral's case, as them as to the reason for this sudden guard muster. "Yes, sir. We'll wait for them then," Gloom answered, stepping back into line with the rest of the Silent Night Guard. There was nothing else that could be done until the captain arrived, so the IS&D fell in. Prey shot a look at the Thestral on his right in the line, shying away as he got too close to his personal space. He didn't like this, having rows of night guards all around them. His height made the gap in the line where he stood exceptionally obvious to anyone who might have casually glanced along the line. Not that his pale white wool didn't already stand out against the uniform dark gray of the night guards like white on black. Just then, Captain Nighthawk and Shining Armor marched into the hall at double time, Lieutenant Screech and Swift Arrow hot on their tails. Everyone came swiftly to attention. Shining Armor took the initiative and spoke first for the both of them. "You've all been assembled this morning because of the smog blanketed in the sky above Canterlot. There's been a situation. As we speak, a dragon elder has taken up residence in an old cave in the mountains close by. The beast's intention is to hibernate, something we cannot allow." Nighthawk had broken off to join his night guards, leaving Shining Armor to continue his address. The Royal Guard captain surveyed the assembled guards, quite a few only days into their new job, all of their attention riveted on him. If anyone hadn't been paying attention, the word dragon had definitely fixed that. "Dragons can hibernate from anywhere to a few months to a few decades. This is an adult dragon. The smoke he or she is producing as they sleep is what is darkening our sky outside of Canterlot. And it's not just Canterlot. All the towns and villages unlucky enough to be nearby are also suffering the same effects. If this continues, it won't be long before crops start to die. Small birds are already dying in the smoke." Shining Armor informed them seriously, like they should care about small animal life. "If the wind only came down the mountains in the other direction, or the elevation was a little different." He broke off and shook his head. "But that's neither here nor there. All of the guard has been called out. We have to stop this dragon before it enters deep hibernation. Princess Celestia has decided we will try a diplomatic approach first, and is sending an envoy." Prey saw something flash in Shining Armor's eyes, but he was far too away to see what it was. Shining Armor continued, his voice carrying. "The guard is to make sure that if this dragon elder does not leave our mountain by choice, we are to force it. Princess Celestia is confident it will not come to that, but 4 companies of both Royal Guards and Night Guards will be deployed just in case." 4 companies was 400 guards. That was 400 ponies to deal with one dragon. It was slowly starting to dawn on the guards just what this meant. "This is just like training," Shining Armor encouraged them. "Stick together, trust in one another, and stand strong." His encouragement worked, too. That was the worst bit. The fools in the Royal Guard actually believed the nonsense their captain was spouting. They chose to listen to the comforting words rather than to see reality, deluded enough to believe their Royal Guard training would somehow help them against a dragon. What could shiny armor, training how to march and sink, and the correct procedure to arrest a pony do against a dragon? Prey had never seen a dragon before. He doubted whether anyone here had seen a dragon before. Whatever that story was about an adopted baby dragon hanging around the palace didn't count. However, unlike them, Prey had more knowledge than merely stories about the giant winged reptiles. One of those few precious books Prey had managed to steal back before Dreverton had been on dragons. And not one which only talked about them for a few pages as abstract fire breathers from far away and unexplored dragonlands. Dragons were few and far between, mysterious beasts that lived for centuries. They didn't come near civilization, and if they were ever spotted, it was almost exclusively as a distant silhouette, so high up in the sky that they were mere dots. And for most normal people, that was the extent of what they'd ever see of a dragon. But what Prey knew was already enough for him to treat dragons as a threat only slightly below that of a natural disaster. The royal guard knew that dragons were dangerous. Hell, they were actually apprehensive instead of arrogantly overconfident for once. Who wouldn't be cautious about facing a giant, flying, fire-breathing monster? But they weren't scared enough. Not even close. The stolen book had not minced any words. The author, one of the few to ever travel to the borders of the Dragonlands, plainly and bluntly referring to them as the Sky Terrors. A lot of what the book contained was only theory and conjecture, because no one had ever been in a position to perform tests to obtain accurate results, but what it said was more than enough to instill fear in Prey. Prey tried to catch Gloom's eye, trying to signal to him how dangerous this dragon was, but Gloom's eyes were forward along with everyone else's. Prey closed his own eyes and took a slow breath to calm himself. It allowed him to check the thoughts of the surrounding night guards, and he was deeply relieved to see that they were not taking this as well as the royal guards were. If we get close, we'll be roasted. A dragon elder? One of the largest? Luna, help us. My spear won't even go through that monster's scales. We only have numbers going for us. I can't fight a dragon. It can also fly. Moon preserve us. This diplomat better succeed. The Night Guard were still suicidally prepared to carry out their duty to try and drive off the dragon. But they at least had some idea of what they were being ordered to do. But they still didn't even know the half of it. As dragons got older, they got stronger. The older, the larger and more dangerous. Their scales could take crash landings into jagged mountains without leaving a mark. Their teeth could shear through diamond like an apple, making all armor of any kind completely useless. Worse, dragons were highly magical beasts. Their bodies were filled with natural magic, making them almost impervious to any magical assault. And their main weapon, their fire, was not simple flames. If it were hot enough to melt through rock, that would be enough. But it was a kind of raw, primordial spell fire. It burned straight through shield spells like paper. Any enchantments or magic subjected to their flames would crumble in mere moments. The book speculated that there was nothing in nature, and likely nothing Equestrian made, that Dragonfire could not destroy. But worst of all, what scared Prey more than any of that? Dragons were sentient. In Prey's mind, that was what truly set dragons above any other monster. The only reason Prey was not panicking right now was because he was sure Captain Nighthawk had a different mission for the ISND. He'd specified to Starry Wing that he wanted to speak with them separately. The only way the dragon would pose an active threat to Prey was if the royal guards completely failed and the dragon was angry enough to chase the survivors all the way back to Canterlot. No one else jumped straight to assuming the worst case scenario like Prey, but to him, it was second nature. However, if that happened, the Sun Wolf would finally stir herself and defend her den. Prey had no doubt who would win between a dragon and an alicorn. As long as Prey was inside the city when that happened, Prey would be safe in Canterlot. Prey's mind screeched to a halt. Safe in Canterlot? Celestia's presence was defending him. Her might was protecting him in Canterlot. Is this how ponies feel? Knowing that whatever they get themselves into, Celestia will dig them out of it? He thought angrily. Prey's jaw tightened, disgust welling in his chest. I hate her! I hate her! I hate her! After all these years, after the complete annihilation of the Resistance, his village, and all those lives, he finally got to see what it was like enjoying protection from the other side. Like how the border guards were supposed to defend the villagers from the start. Shining Armor was still talking, Prey missing the first half of whatever he'd said. So deafened he was by the suicidal stupidity he was hearing. You couldn't fight a dragon. You could only run or hide. The Weather Pegasi will be removing the smoke from the skies in shifts, short term for now. At least until we can rid ourselves of this dragon. To the guards who are staying, you will be out on the streets. Your duty is to keep everyone calm. Lieutenant Swift Arrow will be overseeing that. Assure them that we are fixing everything, And above all, keep them from panicking. How many of them are going to die in this insane venture? Prey wondered, feeling blank. And all because Princess Celestia couldn't be bothered to go and destroy the dragon herself. Prey. Prey twitched, hearing his name whispered. It was Gloom, turning his head back to give Prey an encouraging look. Don't worry, you're not gonna fight any dragon, he whispered. Prey resisted, snorting. He'd figured that out already. However, Gloom's deduction was different from Prey's. Prey knew Nighthawk obviously had a different task for the ISND, while Gloom just had no intention of letting Prey go anywhere near the dragon. Fools do not fight monsters. That is the duty of the adults. The Royal Guard captain continued to give out more instructions, explaining their time frame and route that would take them to the mountain. He kept it as short as possible, before dismissing them all to their posts, finishing with, "And may Celestia watch over us!" The Royal Guards got to it with vigor. Somehow, over the course of Shining Armor's address, all their lingering doubts had been eliminated. Prey saw it in their eyes. Those weren't the eyes of people afraid for their lives. Their eyes held confidence, bravado, and the optimistic self-belief so inherent to pony guards he'd come across. These ponies knew this was dangerous, yes, it was a dragon after all. But they all empathetically knew they'd be returning home at the end of the day. There was no possibility for any other outcome in their heads, and won't this be a story to tell every pony? The Night Guard hadn't broken formation yet, still waiting for the order to move from their officers. There was a lot more dread in their collective thoughts. Sergeant Gloom, Nighthawk barked up front, grabbing the ISD's attention. Yes, sir, Gloom saluted. Nighthawk jerked his head, indicating he wanted to speak off to the side of the hall. Come, he ordered curtly. An order to Gloom was an order to Crimson and Prey as well, and all three of them left their line to do as Nighthawk ordered. Nighthawk got straight to the point. There has been a report of a disturbance last night in Lower Canterlot. The pony who reported it said he thought he heard the sounds of violence, but was too afraid to leave his flat to report it until early this morning, right as this dragon incident was happening. Nighthawk's eyes smoldered with frustration. But that's just an unhappy coincidence. You will be going to investigate the reported disturbance. Yes, sir. It wasn't like Gloom could have refused. Lieutenant Screech is staying behind and in charge. He has the reported disturbance location. Get it from him. Any questions? Nighthawk summed up, ready to leave and get back to the larger, dragon-shaped issue now that he'd passed on this smaller one to them. Gloom couldn't help but glance behind Nighthawk to where the Night Guards were filing out under Starry Wing's lead. They could be off to possibly fight and die against a dragon. What if we don't ever see some of them again? Gloom couldn't help but wonder. Sir, why us? Gloom asked. The ISND cannot help against a dragon, Nighthawk said bluntly, pointing a wing claw at Prey to clearly illustrate why. The ISND is available. Every pony else is busy. Nighthawk's logic was irrefutable. Any other questions? Prey could see Gloom knew there wasn't any time for him to say anything further, despite how much he really wanted to. No, sir. We'll go find Lieutenant Screech straight away, he acknowledged with a salute. Nighthawk didn't waste any time on goodbyes. Evidently, he had things to be doing, like getting ready to face a dragon. The guard hall was emptying at a steady flow now, the individual guard units being divided up and told where they were assigned. The three of them exchanged glances and headed towards Screech to ask for the location. The second lieutenant was just as busy as the other officers, even if he was going to be staying behind to manage the skeleton crew of night guards. That just meant he had more areas to cover while Nighthawk and the rest were gone, and less night guards to do it with. The ISND had to wait until they were almost the last ones left in the hall before Screech finally had a spare minute to tell them about the incident they were supposed to be investigating. Sergeant Gloom, good, Screech acknowledged, already looking harried. And today was supposed to be easy after all the excitement of the trial. Captain Nighthawk filled you in? He asked. Just that there was a report of a disturbance in Lower Canterlot from last night, sir, Gloom said. If it were just that, it wouldn't be a problem. But the place noises were reported to come from is a shady area. I doubt you would have heard, but there was a pony found beaten up in that neighborhood 2 nights ago. The stallion says he doesn't remember his attackers' faces, but the night guard who spoke to him is sure he's not telling us something. How badly was he beaten? Gloom asked. Badly bruised. Nothing broken, and he can walk, Screech answered. Will we find him at the hospital, sir? You won't. He's been discharged, although that's not relevant to your investigation. But it does prove the area is unsafe. I need you to investigate this disturbance. It's unlikely you'll find anything now, but we have to look anyway. The report happened during the night, so it's our jurisdiction, Screech said. Yes, sir. And you're going to be going with some of the royal guards, too, Screech added. Gloom blinked. Pardon, sir? You know we get at least 5 reports like this every week, but this one could be more serious. The pony said he thought he heard a scream in his report. That's why you're working with the royal guards on this one, Screech informed them seriously. 5 reports? That's it? Your streets are that safe, but you think this could be more serious? How about the dragon, for instance? Prey thought in derision. Perhaps the lieutenant realized how silly all this sounded in the light, or rather the shadow, of the far more serious issue, because he went on. This dragon and smog might be a bigger problem, but we can't let law and order dissolve just because of one threat. Even if he heard nothing more than alley cats fighting, backup never hurt. It'll be a lot faster and easier to interview all the residents with more of you, too. Screech looked towards the hall's doors, where the royal guard had exited from. His frown deepened. Young fools marching into the manticore's den, he thought, letting out a small sigh. I doubt you're going to find anything, Sergeant, but we can't have any more panic going on right now. Take the assignment of royal guards with you. Go, look, make sure all the residents are safe, then report back. And if this helps keep a couple young royal guard idiots from getting themselves killed, then all the better, Screech also thought. Gloom seemed to understand Screech's real motivation here, because he gave the lieutenant a small nod. I understand, sir. We'll do our best. Of course you will. Screech dug around the inside of his armor, finally finding the square of paper he was after. Here's the street's address. Report back if you do find anything. Yes, sir. Gloom quickly checked the address. Don't know it. I'll have to check a map. That'll waste time. Or... Gloom held the paper out to Prey. Prey read it at a glance. 2nd Poppy Street, Western Quarter, Left Avenue. It didn't take more than a moment for Prey to place it on the mental map of Canterlot he memorized. Prey nodded. I know where it is. Good. We'll leave straight away, sir, Gloom told Screech. Don't forget you need to pick up the royal guards first, Screech reminded them. Lieutenant Swift Arrow said the volunteers would be sent to wait at the guard compound gate. Yes, sir. Luna watch over you. It's not us who needs Luna's protection right now, Sergeant Gloom. Screech sighed softly. Gloom had to take a moment to adjust himself once they stepped out of the palace and into the sunlight. Being so tired didn't lend Prey well to the bright light either, nor Crimson by the look of his squinted eyes. Except there wasn't any blinding morning sunlight. The 3 of them looked up to find the blanket of smoke that had shining armor so worked up. Clouds of thick, gray-black smoke sat in the sky, hiding the sun's surface. That's how much of it there was. On the horizon, the sky was as bright and blue as ever, but over here, the only sunlight came from occasional beams which broke through as the smoke constantly drifted. With Canterlot being so high up on the side of a mountain, the thick smog was quite a lot closer than one would have wished to see. That didn't delay the 3 of them for long, as they had a job, or in Crimson and Gloom's case, a duty to do. When they got down to the guard compound, they found it busy. It was made so by all the royal guards marching through and preparing for their journey to the dragon's chosen mountain. Off to the side and out of the way of all the busy guards, the IS&D found who they were supposed to be picking up and taking with them. Scenic Paint, or Paint Spot as he'd asked to be called, was waiting for them, head craned back. Beside him was another fresh-faced royal guard, also staring up at the thick smoke blotting out most of the sky. Neither of them even noticed the IS&D coming towards them. Slack and unobservant. Wouldn't last 10 minutes in the deeper green, Prey thought judgingly. He wasn't the only one unimpressed. Just perfect, Gloom thought. Green recruits. Gloom coughed to get the 2's attention. Then, when they didn't notice over the rest of the hustle and bustle, coughed louder. Scenic and his companion, unfortunately a unicorn, jumped and snapped to attention. Sir! They both shouted automatically. There's no need to shout in my face, Gloom said blandly. Behind him, Prey removed his hooves from his ears. Sorry, sir, the unicorn said sheepishly. You two are the ones assigned to assist the night guard unit going to check the disturbance report, yeah? Gloom double-checked. Yep, that's us. We volunteered, sir, Scenic answered with a proud smile. Gloom looked at him for a long moment, making Scenic's ears start to dip. Why did you volunteer for this specific task? Gloom asked. Oh, that's easy. Our sergeant asked for a couple of volunteers from those staying to partner with the night guard, and he said if any pony did, they should meet Sergeant Gloom here. So I thought, since I've already met you guys, it would be best if I volunteered, Scenic said, sounding confident. Inside, the Earth Stallion was a lot less sure of himself. They don't hate me, right? I mean, I was a bit stupid, but then that Thestral came and said hi at breakfast, so... Gloom made a non-committal noise. Alright, well, you're here now. I know Scenic Paint's name. What about you? He asked the unicorn. My name is Quickdraw, sir. The unicorn mentally braced himself. Here comes the arbitrary joke, he thought. After a moment where Gloom just continued looking him up and down, that changed to wishing the creepy Thestral would just make the darn joke. Make any joke like a normal pony. Quickdraw and I know each other from boot camp. We were in the same training squad, sir. Scenic Paint chimed in just as the moment was starting to drag into awkward. Gloom blinked, giving himself a small shake. I have not worked with Unicorn before. If you can think of something with your magic that might be helpful, please suggest it. I'm Sergeant Gloom. This is Crimson, and this is Prey. Quickdraw only stared a little bit at Prey, who was pretending not to notice the unicorn's attention, meaning Scenic had no doubt already mentioned the strange lamb to his unicorn friend. Let's go. The address is in Lower Canterlot. To get there should take, Prey? How long? Gloom asked, already turning to lead them away. Half an hour? Prey shrugged. He didn't give a more accurate estimate, because Scenic Paint and Quickdraw were here. That is if there are no crowds in the way, caused by the dragon smoke, I mean, Crimson added. Right, Quickdraw, Paint Spot. If we need to split up, the meeting point is Canterlot Main Square. Now let's go. Sir, what if we pass ponies who are in need of help on our way there? Scenic asked. If they need help, we'll help. Simple as that. Now, let's go, Gloom repeated firmly. They squeezed out of the guard compound entrance, all the Royal Guard traffic in and out at the moment making it difficult. Prey had estimated it about 50-50 chance whether the spoiled rich ponies of Canterlot would have either been out panicking in force on the streets or holed up in their houses. It was the latter. Outside of the gate, the pristine streets were almost deserted under the smoke-filled sky. Perhaps these nobles had a better sense of self-preservation than Prey had first credited them with. It all looks so different without the sun. Darker, Prey heard Quickdraw mumble to Scenic as they set off, eyes flicking to the sky every few seconds. To produce all this smoke in just one day, Scenic mumbled back. This dragon must be ginormous. Gloom looked to Prey as they approached the first junction on the main street. Which way? Straight on until Narrow Avenue, then right, third left, straight to the end, take Sparkling Office Row. 2 more rights, fourth left, second left, straight on, then right onto Poppy Street, Prey answered, just quiet enough so the 2 royal guards at the back wouldn't hear, but not so quiet Gloom would realize he was doing so on purpose. You can remember all that just fine, right? Gloom questioned. Nod. Good, because I can't. Just tell me when we need to take a turn. Yes, sir, Prey said, already slightly out of breath from keeping up with the longer strides. They were very lucky the smoke was only on the skyline, not filling the streets, or they wouldn't be able to breathe at all right now. 1 or 2 breaths is all it takes, Prey thought grimly. The capital city of Equestria looked a very different place with the streets almost deserted. Prey deeply despised Canterlot and all its inhabitants. But with the smoke blotting out the sky except in shifting patches, it brought up unpleasant memories of a familiar scene. The village deserted and smoldering, the firestorm rolling down the hill onto the resistance, the sky filled with ash over the desolate forest. But that's not going to happen to Canterlot, Prey thought, gesturing to Gloom that they needed to take this right turn. Deep down, he wished it would. Not while he was in Canterlot, obviously, but he would love to watch it burn from the base of the mountain. At least, he thought he would. Not that it would ever happen. Celestia ruled here, and the unicorn's capital city was certainly heavily warded with magic against the possibility of an inferno. The world was unfair like that. "This is Lower Canterlot, sir?" Quickdraw asked, looking around as the district changed from large and spacious to small and compact. Gloom glanced back. "Yeah, did you notice something?" No, it was nothing, sir," Quick said, shaking his head. Prey, of course, could hear what his thoughts were saying. "This place looks dodgy. Since I'm a royal guard now, I'll be coming here quite a lot in the future. Better get used to it." Prey looked where Quickdraw was looking. Neat, red-tiled roofs, narrow but well-maintained cobble streets, white curtains drawn behind clean windows. The only thing that made this area possibly seem shady was the literal shade being cast over everything by the dragon smoke. "Yes, definitely dodgy according to the privileged unicorn." Gloom stopped. They'd come to the street sign, Poppy Street. "This is the place," Gloom said. On this street, the houses had given way to what looked like old office buildings, and further past that, large warehouses loomed up. "So, where do we start, sir?" Scenic asked, looking around judgingly just like Quickdraw had. "Haven't you done any guard training for this?" Gloom replied. Scenic and Quick looked around them. "Not like this, sir," they admitted. Gloom suppressed a sigh. "I think I know why Swift Darrow was happy to let his new guards volunteer. We'll be knocking on every door to see if any pony heard or saw anything suspicious last night. You two take that side of the street. We'll take this side," Gloom instructed. "Yes, sir," the two royal guards chorused, relieved to have clear orders to follow. "Crimson, fly around and have a look from above. Check for fresh damages, disturbances, anything out of place. You know what to do." "Yes, sir," Crimson said, already backing up to get a small running start. Prey instinctively covered his eyes and turned away against any dust kick-up. "Prey, I guess you'll just come with me. Hey, are you listening?" "Oh, right, dust. Come on," Gloom said, leading them for the closest building, leaving Scenic and Quick to finish rubbing blindly at their eyes. 20 minutes later, after having to explain multiple times who they were and what they were doing, they finally reached the last office building on their side of the street. "Yes, sir, I am a guard. No, the night guard. Yes, for Princess Luna. Yes, I'm sure. No, I can't do anything about the smoke. No, not personally, but it is being taken care of as we speak, so please don't worry. No, that's not it. Sir, please just answer the question. Nothing? How about around this building, or would anyone else in here know? You all only work here during the day? Please think hard. Nothing at all? All right, thank you for your time." The last door was hurriedly closed, the pony on the other side all too keen to put a slab of wood between himself and the sharp-toothed Thestral trailing a lamb around with him like a weirdo. Scenic Paint and Quickdraw hadn't been as quick as them, and were still only halfway down their side of the street. The ponies whose houses they were knocking on, or who worked there, were all a lot more willing to talk with members of the Royal Guard on their doorstep. In fact, they were eager to talk, or rather seek assurance that the smoke problem was going to be dealt with. Gloom peered up at the dragon smoke above them while the two of them waited. "Stay here, Prey. I'm gonna go ask Crimson if he's found anything before we move on to the next street," he said, stretching out his bat wings and giving them a few warm-up flaps. Prey hopped off the step to give Gloom some space for takeoff, and 5 seconds later, Gloom was winging his way up above the buildings. Prey watched him set a course for the circling figure of Crimson, slowly making low passes over the rooftops. "Wings are so convenient." Prey scuffed the cement under his hoof, checking to see if any fine ash had yet filtered down from the sky. The reason he checked was that the faint smell of smoke had finally started to drift into the streets, but his hoof came away clean. Well, clean of ash anyway. He imagined by the end of the day the whole of Canterlot would stink of smoke. "Whatever is in this dragon's smoke is strange. Lighter than air, since it hasn't drifted down yet. No ash, so the dragon isn't even burning anything to make this smoke. Magical fire smoke?" Prey wondered. He heard the sound of leathery wings flapping closer, and closed his eyes as Gloom landed, Cloudsteel's shoes clacking loudly on paving slabs. "Crimson can't find anything. We'll move on to the next street. If there's anything, It's gotta be within this area, Gloom said. Gloom turned and called across the street to the two royal guards. We're going on to the next street up. When you're done on that side, do the same. Scenic and Quick both stopped to give a full salute and, yes, sir, to show they'd heard, rather than just a simple wave of acknowledgement. Unnecessary, but oh well, it's just for the day, Gloom thought grouchily. None of the IS&D had gotten enough sleep or any breakfast, which was just the icing on the cake to this dragon smog incident, really. Stepping onto the next street over and closer to the warehouses, Prey got the impression that something about it looked familiar. He peered more closely at the lone scaffolding on one of the roofs, the way that paving slab sat an inch askew in front of the green door. I've not been here before. I'd remember straight away. So why? Lemon Pink. He hadn't been here before, but Lemon Pink had. This was the area Lemon had come to the secret meeting with those 4 salt drug dealers. Prey only had a vague impression of the route she had gone, which was why he hadn't immediately recognized it, since it wasn't an important memory to share. Prey looked towards the end of the street. The secret house was that one there on the end, by the smallest warehouse. And this is the area that the disturbance report came from, Prey thought. It probably wasn't a coincidence, even if the report had come from the next street over. Prey, of course, didn't mention a word of this to Gloom, just followed along as the sergeant started up his door routine down this street. However, the steal yielded nothing as they, or more accurately Gloom, moved down the row knocking doors. Eventually, they got to the final house on the end, the one in which Lemon Pink had met those 4 drug dealers. The building looked completely abandoned, and the notice nailed to the door said, "Warning, condemned, do not enter," indicated to the fact. The windows were completely boarded up, and it didn't look like the frames had seen a lick of paint this decade. The salt dealers had chosen this hideout well. It didn't look like anyone had been here in years. There was even dust on the door knocker. Gloom tried knocking anyway, but it was obvious there was no one inside. Prey watched him as he shrugged and stepped back into the street, looking over the fence to the next door warehouse. The dividing fence ran all the way around the warehouse's perimeter, and the locked gate on the far side. He seemed content to wait until Crimson and the others finished their tasks. Prey tilted his head back towards the sky, watching the smoke. Prey was debating with himself. Should he suggest to Gloom that there was something off about this house or not, thereby exposing this salt den? There were pros and cons to each choice. I could gain more trust and improve my standing in the IS&D. That'll make it easier to manipulate Gloom in the future. It could also help create an opportunity for Lemon Pink to capitalize on. The downsides were a little more extreme. These drug dealers would certainly not appreciate the IS&D sticking their noses where it didn't belong. Curiosity killed the cat, after all. Plus, now was also definitely a bad time with what Lemon Pink had found out. The salt boss, whomever they were, was coming to town. No, I won't say anything. The possible rewards are too small and uncertain to take the risk, Prey decided. Sir, something feels off about this area. Maybe this house, Crimson said, swooping down to hover in front of them. Prey hid aside. Or that. Gloom looked at the abandoned house. This one? Why? Crimson slowly alighted, taking a moment to carefully fold his wings and realign his feathers. Well, no, sir. I mean, maybe not this particular one, but this is the last house on the street, so it probably is this one. That wasn't exactly foolproof logic, but Gloom stepped up to the door and knocked again. Then tried the door handle. Locked. Quick and Scenic have yet to finish checking their side of the street. Let's see if that turns up anything first, Gloom decided. The 2 new and much slower royal guards were just starting at the far end of the street. Crimson nodded. Yes, sir. But he was still looking at the door, eyeing it from different angles. We could go help them, Prey suggested, motioning to Quick and Scenic. He was trying to draw attention away from this house. It was a valid suggestion, so he couldn't be accused of anything. Alright, let's do that. Hopefully some pony here might remember something this time, Gloom agreed. 5 minutes later, and the 5 of them were back to square one. Scenic and Quick's enthusiasm had diminished somewhat as they stood, considering their next move.
I don't want to have to assure any more grandmere that their cats will be fine in the smoke,
Quickdraw was thinking.
We couldn't find anything, sir,
Scenic Pate reported unnecessarily. Gloom nodded, now almost convinced that this disturbance report really was a dud. They should return to help out at the palace instead of wasting any more time here. However, because of what Crimson had said, he was still considering giving
that condemned house one more look over. How about trying that big warehouse?
Prey suggested. Again, valid, and again, a distraction.
The other warehouses are bigger, actually,
Quickdraw corrected him. Prey smiled sweetly back.
The warehouse is actually a good idea. It would be a perfect place to hide something, after all,
Gloom thought, attention turning to the warehouse. He took a single step in the locked gate's direction and stopped. He looked between the warehouse and the secret drug dealer's house.
Hang on. My cutie mark's telling me something here.
Oh, come on! Prey thought. That's just cheating!
Let's split up. You two go and check the warehouse. I want to have another look around here. If we still find nothing, we'll knock one more street, then return to the palace,
Gloom said to Quick and Scenic.
But, sir, the fence and the gate's locked too,
Quickdraw said.
Then just see if there's any sign of any pony trying to climb over or break through,
Gloom ordered.
Really, these two?
Gloom thought, exasperated.
Okay, sir. Don't worry. You can count on us, sir,
Scenic Pate saluted. All three of the IS&D looked at him, like there was some big joke they were missing. Luckily, Scenic had learned from last time and moved to beat a hasty retreat.
We'll just, get right on that then, sir,
he said, dragging Quick with him as they left. With the two greenies gone, Prey, Crimson, and Gloom went back to the condemned house for the third time and stood before it.
It certainly looks abandoned, but it doesn't feel correct somehow,
Gloom mused.
How about trying to see if any of the boarded-up windows have a crack to peek in through?
Prey suggested. Crimson and Gloom had already figured out that there was something off about this house. Further attempts at distraction would be suspicious now that Gloom had clearly stated his doubts. Since the decision had been taken out of Prey's hooves, it would be better to fully commit himself and go along with it. Gloom and Crimson didn't appear enamored with his suggestion, as it was a bit beneath them as representatives of the Night Guard to be seen peeking in through windows.
Crimson, go see if there's anything on the roof. I'll go around this side. Prey, you take that side. See if anything catches your attention,
Gloom said, brushing his annoyance away.
I'm tired. Prey's just making a helpful suggestion.
Crimson took off and Gloom went to the left. Prey shrugged to himself and started off around the right hoof side. He wasn't tall enough to make his own suggestion about peering through any cracks in the boarded-up windows, but it didn't seem likely he could have managed it even if he wasn't a runt. The windows were as tightly boarded up as a noble family vault. The faint, drifting whiffs of smoke were catching Prey's nose more frequently now as the smog settled in. The taint of sulfur was not a pleasant one. 1 minute later, the three of them met up at the back of the building. Gloom pointed with a hoof.
There's a back door,
he said, stating the obvious. You couldn't see the door from the air, sir. Do you think it's hidden like this on purpose? Crimson asked. Prey cautiously approached the old door from the side, checking to see if he could spot anything off about it. He didn't feel any magic tingle in his hooves to indicate any enchantment, but that didn't mean it couldn't still be magically trapped. Or ordinarily trapped, for that matter.
What are you doing, Prey?
Gloom asked, a bit thrown by Prey's obvious overcaution. Instead of answering, Prey brushed his ear back and grabbed the trailing end of his ribbon, gripped between the hoof cleft. He slipped the silk's end between the gap in the door frame and ran it up and down as high as he was able to reach. He retracted the ribbon and held it up for both Gloom and Crimson to see.
No cobwebs or dust on it.
Gloom caught on immediately.
This door's been opened, and recently, too.
The owners? Crimson asked, then shook his head, answering his own question. No, Prey is right. This house is condemned. Who would be going in and out? Gloom considered the door fresh.
All right, give me your opinions. Do you think this is relevant to the disturbance report or not?
Prey shrugged.
Logically speaking, No, it shouldn't be related.
Prey was certain it was, but he wasn't going to admit anything. No, sir, not to this. But it's related to something suspicious, Crimson said. Gloom tried the door handle, not noticing Prey flinch away from the door as he did so. Also locked.
Alright, let me put it another way.
Gloom nodded up at the smoke-shrouded sky.
Do you think it's worth our time right now with everything else that's going on? Lieutenant Screech will probably want help back at the palace,
Prey answered, again seeing an opportunity to get them out of here without making it seem like he was trying to avoid this house. Sir, Crimson said slowly, I think... No, I'm almost certain we should go in. He brought his face very close to the door, like he was trying to stare a hole through it. Gloom looked at him sharply.
Can you...
he asked in concern. No, not quite. It may be nothing, sir. Crimson's yellow eyes flicked to the sky. There's a lot of smoke.
Then we're going in,
Gloom decided. He gave the door handle a solid shake, then a shove.
Step back.
Prey and Crimson did so as Gloom turned around and lined up the door.
This is the Night Guard. Any ponies on this property are commanded to open this door. Failure to comply will lead to forced entry,
Gloom shouted. He didn't wait more than 5 seconds for the response, which they all knew wasn't coming, before he crouched and let loose a double back-hoof buck to the door. It was a powerful strike, despite its deceptive quickness, and hit just below the door handle. There was a very solid-sounding thunk as horseshoes met wood. The door vibrated, but didn't otherwise budge. Gloom adjusted his position and let loose another buck. Thunk! Same result again. Thunk! 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 Gloom stopped and turned to examine the door. The wood beneath the door handle was bruised and imprinted multiple times with the shape of cloud steel horseshoes, but the lock had held firm.
Huh. Well, that proves it. Something is definitely suspicious about this house. It's supposed to be old. Any lock should have broken under that,
Gloom said, scrutinizing the door even more closely.
Either we need an axe or the key to get in through this entrance,
Prey observed. Then how about we try the windows instead, sir? Crimson suggested, pointing to the closest boarded-up square. Gloom considered the window.
There's nobody waiting inside to take us off guard, so it won't matter if we have to crawl through, he thought. Alright, good idea. Come give me a hoof, Crimson.
The windows had been boarded up from the inside. While that meant the planks couldn't be pried off, it did mean they were weak to blows from the outside, which would force the nails back out. The windows were too high up for anyone to connect with a kick, at least with any power because of the angle. However, that only held true if the pony in question was kicking from a standing position on the ground. Gloom and Crimson could fly. Both of them took to the air, hovering maybe half a pace off the ground. Gloom gave a powerful flap of his wings and shot forwards, and just before he would have struck the window's muzzle first, arched up sharply and whipped his back legs forward. Crack! The boards juddered and bent. No normal random Pegasus could have pulled off such a tight turn without either mistiming or losing all momentum. Crimson came in next, somehow going faster and putting even more power into his kick. Crack! Gloom was up again, then Crimson. Crack! Crack! The tough wood was beginning to splinter, but it really should have caved already under such powerful kicks. It is not breaking like it should, sir. Gloom agreed with a snort of frustration.
It's too solid. There should be more give in the planks.
Prey was peering closely up at the window they'd been striking. A sliver of wood at the edge of a board had splintered off. Prey squinted, blue eyes trying to see what lay behind through the crack.
Well, it's no wonder you can't kick it in,
Prey announced with false cheer.
The window's been bricked up from the inside behind those boards.
Gloom's ears laid back in annoyance.
Tartarus! We're gonna need to get some pony with proper tools. Or Crimson could fly up and break in through the roof, fly down, and unlock the door from the inside,
Prey pointed out.
Sir,
he added.
Oh, that could work too,
Gloom thought. He looked at Crimson.
Do you think that's doable?
Yes, sir. Crimson was already backing up to get some room for another takeoff. A flash of feathers later, and then Crimson was on top of the roof and out of sight. There came the sound of terracotta tiles being shifted, then clicking, as they were neatly stacked to the side. Prey and Gloom patiently waited by the door. There wasn't much else they could do. Well, Gloom could fly up and help, but there wasn't much Prey could do.
What's hidden inside? This place is built like a mini fortress.
I'm in, sir, came Crimson's muffled voice from up on the roof, followed by scuffling as the Pegasi pushed his way in between the slats and rafters. With his sharp hearing, Prey heard the sound of breaking wood inside, even if Gloom couldn't. There must have been a thin ceiling to get through also. But even Gloom could hear the sound of the lock being worked on the other side of the door. Then 1, 2, 3, 4 different deadbolts being drawn back. Crimson's reserved expression greeted them as he pulled the door open. I'm in, sir.
Yeah, I can see that. Thank you,
Gloom commented, stepping in. Seeing as no traps had been triggered by either Gloom or Crimson, Prey followed, leaving the smell of smoke outside. It was just one large room, which was almost completely unilluminated. Only the open door and a brand new hole in the ceiling let any of the dim light from outside in. Prey looked around. The building's contents almost exactly matched Lemon Pink's memory. A wooden table in the middle, some chairs, and crates stacked in the background. The difference was, those crates were now empty. Prey could see that much, even in the near darkness.
How about now? Can you sense anything?
Gloom asked Crimson, already starting to search the place. Crimson started to push the door shut. I'm not sure, sir. Maybe. Perhaps. Something muted? He answered cautiously.
Hey, don't close the door!
Prey protested. Crimson blinked yellow eyes at him. It will keep the smell of smoke out, he said, features obscured in the gloom.
Yes, but I can't see in the dark like you two, can I?
Both Gloom and Crimson seemed to have forgotten that little point. Gloom looked around.
Good point. Whichever ponies used this place probably couldn't either. That means there's got to be a lamp in here somewhere.
And there was. A crystal glow lantern set neatly on a shelf. Gloom hooked it down with a wing claw, and the enchantment flickered to life, casting an even white glow over the room. Why did they use oil lamps and candles in the palace instead of these?
I don't see anything, and all these crates seem to be empty. But they've only been emptied recently, because there's almost no dust in the bottoms,
Gloom said, checking the crates one by one. The three of them began to comb through the room, starting at the door and moving outwards. It didn't take long for Prey to spot something off.
The crates, tables, chairs, they've all been pushed about and rearranged, then put back, possibly to make space to empty whatever was in these crates. There's little scrape marks on the floor varnish, under those crates with the roughest corners,
he said, pointing it out so they could see.
Good. What does that tell us, though?
Gloom wondered, checking the underside of the table to be thorough. This place looks like it has been abandoned, sir. Recently and in a hurry, I mean, Crimson said, casting around the room, obviously searching for whatever it was that was throwing him off, however that was occurring.
There's nothing left in these crates at all, not even scraps,
Gloom said, leaning in to sniff the wood.
Paper, maybe? Fabric? I can't tell. There's got to be a trace left in at least one of these things. There's stacks of them. Help me look,
Gloom ordered. Prey jumped atop a low stack and looked around, searching for anything that drew his attention in the lamplight.
Walls, floor, ceiling, table, crates.
His eyes went to the densest stack of crates, set against a wall. It was nothing obvious, but...
Their placement is forced,
Prey realized.
There's something under those crates,
Prey declared. The other two immediately stopped their own searches to look.
You sure?
Gloom asked, but he'd already put the lantern down to start unstacking the indicated crates.
Almost 90%,
Prey said. He didn't go over to help. Crimson and Gloom could work a lot faster without a runt getting in their way. But when the crates had all been moved, there was nothing there, just blank floorboards. Prey frowned. Gloom struck the floor with a hoof, but it produced exactly the same solid sound as everywhere else in the room.
It doesn't seem to be hollow,
he said dubiously. Prey had hopped down and came over. He closed his eyes and ran his hoof across the bare floorboards, trying to feel any changes or inequalities. Perhaps we might come back with a unicorn to scan this place. Quick Draw maybe could. Prey heard Crimson suggest from off to the side.
Scanning spells are quite advanced, I think. Quick Drop probably doesn't know any,
Gloom told him, but he sounded a bit uncertain whether that was actually the case. Not being a unicorn or having lived with any in his clan, he wouldn't know. Should I go and get him anyway, sir? Crimson offered.
You won't find anything even if you do,
Prey thought. Whatever was hidden here wasn't hidden with any magic, as Prey could detect any such in his hoofs. That didn't mean there wasn't any magic, but if Prey couldn't find anything, then a unicorn at Quick Draw's tier certainly couldn't. This required finesse, not the brutal magical force all unicorns were born wielding. Prey stopped and moved his hoof back along the same sweep, slower this time. Was that a tiny ridge?
Got it! It's a trapdoor,
Prey declared, opening his eyes. He traced the tiny ridge all the way along to the wall, then across and found the parallel line on the other side.
The hinges must be set under the edge of the wall. Very clever. But how to open it?
He mused, ignoring the other two as they leaned in close to try and find the outline for themselves. Both of them still kept out of Hoof's reach, so Prey was fine with it.
There!
Prey pointed at a knot in the wood where the front edge of the trapdoor must lie.
That! We need a lever or a stick of some kind to lever it up with.
I can see it now, Gloom said, stepping back and tilting his head.
Yeah, there is indeed a door.
Whomever had made this door had done an expert job, and without enchantments too. It was practically invisible and flush with the rest of the floor.
Find a stick of some kind, Gloom ordered. See if they keep the lever around here somewhere for easy use.
A search of the room didn't reveal any pole or lever-like stick.
They must have taken it with them when they left, same as the key for the door,
Gloom said, frustrated. Hold on, sir. I have an idea, Crimson said. He flapped back up to the hole in the roof and, with some effort, managed to extract one of the slats he'd kicked in earlier to enter. It hadn't been broken off evenly, so it came to a point. Do you think this will do?
Only one way to find out.
Gloom jabbed the pointed end into the knot on the floor, wedging it in tight. Then he started to push. Whatever lever was originally used, it must have been longer than this one for better leverage. The slat started to bend and splinter alarmingly, but the trapdoor, which had so far been nearly invisible, jerked up an inch, now clearly revealing its shape.
It's going to break,
Gloom warned.
Higher! We just need to wedge this in,
Prey told him quickly, holding out a sliver of broken crate. Gloom grunted and pushed the slat harder, the thick trapdoor levering up. A crack of darkness came into view, and quick as a snake, Prey shoved the piece under. I've got it, sir. Crimson lowered himself and managed to find enough purchase to help push the trapdoor higher.
Good, Gloom grunted. Okay, switching in 3, 2, 1.
Gloom let go of the slat, darting in to get his hoofs under the edge along with Crimson. Prey thought for a moment the heavy trapdoor would thump shut and crush their hooves, but the two night guards actually managed to lift the door up, and once it cleared a hoof's width of darkness into the space below, it was almost too easy. The door swung silently up on greased hinges, and locked into place by some unseen mechanism. There was a moment as they all looked in. Nothing could be seen down there apart from the first step down, but Prey heard something in the uninviting blackness. A tiny, scratching sound. Prey took a breath.
Oh,
he thought as the smell welled up.
Oh, so that's how it is.